Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are supposed to have more people joining in, but we will start respecting your time schedules. Thank you for joining our webinar for 2021 entitled Equipment Standardization, presented by Mr. Gordon Budge. I will give the floor for him to introduce himself much better. Please stay tuned, follow our LinkedIn page, stay in touch with the society. We have more webinars coming in, and hopefully with your engagement in this session and questions, we can have a good session, an informative session where Gordon can exchange his experience with us. So please, Gordon, you can take the mic now.
Okay, hi. Good evening, everyone who's on the call. My name's Gordon Budge. So we've got about an hour to talk to the topic of equipment standardization. I guess maybe before we get going and I introduce myself, Ahmed, do you want to just talk about kind of the admin of asking questions and raising your hand? Because I'm really keen that we get some interaction going here, you know, whether that's left towards the end or I'm quite happy to take questions on as we go along, but I think it's really important that we get some interaction. I've only essentially 5 slides to go through, so I'm kind of hoping there'll be plenty of commentary, questions, queries, you know, just two-way dialogue. So how do you want to handle that before I get going?
Yeah, exactly. Gordon, I have pointed out he needs some interaction. So I suggest we use the chat room as Gordon speaks. You can just highlight you have a question, and then he can pose it when he finishes his statement, and you can open your mic and have the exchange of discussion. So if this is good for you, Gordon, please let me know.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I just really encourage plenty of dialogue. Okay, so yeah, we'll get going. So yeah, my name's Gordon Budge. Goodness, I've been in the industry since I graduated from Robert Gordon's many years ago, I think 37 years or so. I've just taken voluntary redundancy from BP at the end of last year. So I'm currently, what was it they say, without portfolio. I'm just chilling here in Scotland. 37 years, started out as a graduate mechanical engineer with Vetco Offshore in Aberdeen. I've been fortunate in my career. I've lived and worked in Singapore with Vetco. Spent a lot of time in Houston. I left them in about 1996 and I went for 10 years or so doing consultancy work with a variety of other operators. That resulted in joining BP in 2000 as a subsea well engineering consultant. And after 6 years, up to 2006 or thereabouts, I've been consulting with BP. I then went and joined BP staff down in Cairo, ironically. So I spent 2 years on what was to be the West Nile Delta project. That kind of came to maybe the progression wasn't as quick as we wanted, so I ended up doing the BP Torque project down there for 2 years. I then came back and worked in London, BP London, latterly in BP Aberdeen. My kind of final position, I guess throughout my career, it's been very much on a subsea hardware, specialising in wellhead and tree well systems and subsea trees. So that's the topic for today, kind of standardization, particularly focused on equipment and particularly subsea tree systems. So yeah, that's who I am. I also had the pleasure of kind of chairing JIP33 Work Group 9, which wrote the 561 document, which I'll talk about. As part of my kind of more wider role as a subsea systems manager for BP, looking after the technical and delivery side of all our subsea tree business across the globe. Okay, so I'll move on to the next slide. Bear with me.
We already have a question, Gordon, from Mohammed.
Absolutely.
You asked for interaction, didn't you?
What's the question?
It's on the chat, if you can see it.
Oh, let's see. Just bear with me. Good afternoon, Gordon. I guess one question, people's mind, current standardization. Yeah, right. Okay. So the questions around about the definition of standardization, and I think, yeah, we will get into this. I mean, for me, it's absolutely right. It's talking about, what is the subsea tree? Is it highly tuned engineering product? Is it a commodity? I think that objective of commoditizing the subsea tree as an assembly or the subsea tree system is hugely important, and we will definitely get into that. And that whole subject around what does a standardized solution look like, I think should form part of the discussion. But commoditizing it and actually doing less engineering instead of commodity is really important. That plays into more effective. We'll definitely come on to that and talk about that. Absolutely. And indeed, that kind of probably plays nicely right into the very first slide there. Setting the scene in the business context. Just checking. Kind of not assuming everybody necessarily knows what a subsea tree is. So I was asked to maybe just touch on that briefly for those who aren't so familiar. So it's essentially a well-controlled device. So every well, whether it's in the desert or whether it's subsea, has a tree, if it's a producing well or an injecting well. And basically the purpose of the tree, it's a controlling device, both from a well isolation point of view or an flow isolation point of view, and from a flow controlling point of view. So it's got a series of valves, which are primarily open and close isolation devices. It's got lots of sensors on it that allow us to monitor pressures and volumes. And it also typically has some form of throttling or choke to allow us to control the flow rate. So not only isolation, but also flow control. So yeah, there's a picture, a typical kind of subsea tree. The focus is on standardization, and for me, in the slide here, the setting, the scene, and the context. So it's all about how can we look at that tree and optimize it from a cost and schedule point of view and not compromise on quality. That's what it's all about. I mean, a typical tree, if I said order of magnitude nowadays, you could be paying something like $5 million for that thereabouts. So it's a big capital investment for operators, and depending on which tree you select, it could be anything up to probably on average 18 to 22 months delivery. So it always gets a lot of attention in every subsea project for whatever reason. And yeah, that's what we're going to explore, and what does standardization do for us in that kind of context of doing things faster and maybe doing things with more capital efficiency. So yeah, the three comments I've got there in that first slide. So I think we can all see what everybody's doing in the industry with regard to being more energy, talking about more energy and less oil and gas, because there's so many energy sources now, so we need more competition. So subsea's been around. I said I've been in the industry for well over 35 years plus. We need to keep subsea competitive. There's a drive to use other alternative energy sources, so there's more competition in the market. We've got things like remote operations, so we're sort of saying reduce human interfaces. We want less people going offshore, make it more remote, and there's a lot of benefits to that. And something around advancing subsea. So what can we do in the subsea world to make ourselves more competitive through the use of more and more kind of novel technology. Things like subsea compression, subsea boosting, subsea separation. I mean that in the last 10 years has resulted in some really fancy technology. So we need to look at that. We need to look at keeping abreast of the competition, so to speak, by using ever increased subsea technology, as we've seen. I think we've seen with things like boosting and compression. The product maturity aspect of recognizing that we've got, as I say, 35 years worth of tree systems behind us. So when we talk about standardization, we've got a huge database and an installed base of subsea products and tree systems all over the world. So what that tells me is, why can't we be better at standardizing? And maybe to use the chat comment, to commoditize subsea trees more than we're currently doing, with a view that says, well, what is the business proposition? Well, we commoditize it. Hopefully that enhances the value. It makes it more cost competitive through maybe simplification, and certainly through cutting delivery times. Because I think frankly, the kind of deliveries that we can see all too often, even now, are basically too long. But that kind of plays into my second point on the product maturity. Be mindful of meddling. So meddling. So that's what engineers tend to do well. So as engineers, most of us are probably engineers to trade. We like to engineer, and part of this discussion, part of this topic is all about saying, so why is that? It's managing risk. It's a complicated piece of equipment, but we've got loads of them. They're very mature. So can we take it upon us as a community to do less meddling? Because if we do less engineering, less meddling, through use of commoditized or kind of more off-the-shelf products or sub-assemblies to make the tree, then we can do that without compromising quality, but which would surely result in something more competitive, certainly from a timescale and a delivery point. So that aspect of be mindful of meddling, I always kind of like that. I like to get that in there because I think as engineers we're good at doing that, and we like that. But actually, maybe it's not something that it's something that probably gets in the way of driving a standardization. And ultimately, we're all about business. Whether you're an operator, wanting the oil and gas out the ground, or whether you're a supplier wanting to deliver this, cost competitive and value products to the market. So it's all about increasing project value through more efficient sourcing of subsea trees. I talk about focusing on cost reduction. I think it's really important that comes in different guises. Not just capex, but through life, operation expenditure OPEX, and indirectly, maybe most importantly, through schedule optimization. So maybe standardization doesn't mean to say necessarily that we want simpler trees. It's just maybe we want more repeatability and commoditization, and if we can get that and do less engineering or do less meddling, can we cut into the schedule, so that instead of saying we're delivering trees typically 20+ months, why can't we say we're gonna strive to do it in 12 months or less? And I'm sure we'll get into some questions and some discussion on that. Especially we've got some of the representatives on the call from one of the suppliers at least, so we can maybe talk about that. But I think that's quite key, reducing the typical delivery duration to less than 12 months. Increase use of supplier-led solutions. So rather than operators kind of driving the requirement and tending to be bespoke, it's if the suppliers, and we know they're doing this, if the suppliers are developing kind of more off-the-shelf offerings, more commoditization, if you will, catalog configurable as a phrase I've used there, then that should be a good thing. And that's what we need to be striving as a community to do that. And that's where S561 comes into its own, as I'll show you on the next slide. And a key piece isn't just engineering. It's not just what we want and defining the technical requirements. It's about standardizing on the processes we use to get to build and to supply and deliver the tree. That's equally as important. In fact, that's probably more important. So it's not just defining what we want, it's defining how we get it in terms of documentation and quality requirements, welding requirements, fabrication. And you know, drawing on things like the ability to work with suppliers to have material stocking programs in place, where we're no longer relying on you know, long lead raw material being ordered on a bespoke basis. You know, on forgings for some of the components that make the tree, you know, taking 3, 4, 5 months plus to be delivered before they can go on a machine. So that whole opportunity to have not just material stocking programs, but that could be raw material or indeed subcomponents, and that's something that, you know, we've been working as a community between operators and suppliers. We've been working hard on that to look at material stocking programs to kind of support the standardization effort. Okay, so that was, yeah, that's the first slide setting the scene. You know, those themes will come through the remaining slides as well. But if there's anybody got any specific question, I'll just hesitate there before I go on to the next slide. If there's any questions.
Yes, Gordon, we can check the chat box. We have like 3 or 4 questions already.
Okay. Hold on a second.
It would be great if you could read the question in brief for the recording, for the sake of the recording.
Righty-ho. Would you say that the longer 20 months plus lead times are partially driven by demand versus capacity of suppliers? And with the downturn, is there excess capacity in the market which might affect the drive for standardization? You know, there's a number of different things we can look at there. Certainly, we as operators, you know, I've come from an operator background most recently. We can't expect suppliers to commit the funds to pre-invest in stocking agreements, for example, regardless of what unless the demand's there. So, you know, if we look at a tubing hanger body or a valve block body, you know, we say, well, why can't the suppliers, you know, hold stocks of that kind of raw material? But you know, the volume's got to be there. They won't do that, and we shouldn't expect them to do that as operators unless we're giving them commitment on how many wells we're going to drill. You know, and you know, tie that into formal contracts. I think they're probably. I think to talk about excess capacity and maybe if Brent and or Kevin's on the call, they might chip in at some point. But you know, is there excess capacity? Because I think the concern is, you know, we're all cutting our cloth as suppliers, whether that be forging houses or equipment suppliers such as, you know, the big four, Schlumberger, Subsea, FMC, Aker, and Baker Hughes. You know, they're all going through probably reduction programs. So I'm not really sure if there is excess capacity. I think that ultimately drive for standardization ultimately it's got to be about, you know, for me it's just got to be about cost. It's about ultimately we've got to find ways of doing things cheaper, and a big key for me is doing it cheaper, is doing it faster, you know, and getting trees off the critical path and playing a part in increasing our net present value for our projects ultimately to make our subsea projects more competitive. So, you know, when an operator comes along and said, you know, I want sanction to first gas in, you know, 2 years. It's like, well, you know, how are you going to get that if the tree forging, if the trees take 22 months? Well, we need to radically change the way we're thinking. You know, as engineers and as project managers, we need to do things differently. And that's, you know, that standardization has a huge opportunity. It creates a huge opportunity to kind of influence, you know, more business effective outcomes.
Gordon, it's Brent on your comment. I know you asked for my position on this. I can't speak to the wider capacity of other suppliers, but what I would say is that we're in a long cycle business, right? And so the backlogs are healthy. People can look at where things are with regards to which suppliers won what last year. That's pretty common knowledge from different energy resources, and from that standpoint, we haven't seen a deviation from the need for standardization, just predicated simply based on what you just said, quite frankly, which is from our standpoint and from an operator standpoint, they're competing against other energy projects, not just subsea against subsea. And when you start to look at the wider portfolio of those operators, it's very clear that in order for subsea projects to move forward, the ROI not only has to increase and be sustainable, and be done safely and cleanly, it has to be brought forward. And that therein lies the issue. When time becomes the denominator, you don't have the luxury to input the changes that you see over a 20 to 26 month project. And so I'll leave that for you to kind of reflect on. I think you understand where I'm coming from, and I'm trying to be as correct as I can here. But culture is the one question I'm going to ask you about later. And this all goes to how do we get the subsea society and operators and others aligned as to this is the culture going forward, and how do we hold the line on this in a very disciplined format? Discipline not being a bad thing in this instance, discipline being the study for which we get better. And that is the question as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Yeah, just in the interest of time, I'll move quickly on to the other comment. So this was from, let's see, who's that? Iman. Interesting topic. One challenge is that till now there is no specific standard for subsea piping. For example, we tend to use a mix from API to ASME standards. So I think that's a great example. And so what happens, or what's tended to happen is, we get bogged down in this. Well, what will we use on the piping on the tree? Will we use API? Will we use ASME? And I think, as a pragmatic guy who's spent a lot of recent time with an operator, what I want to be able to say now is, listen, do they work? Do they do that? What did they both do the job? Right? Let's just pick one. Let's get in a room and say we're going to use one or the other, and that's going to be it. And more, I think you'll see that's kind of approach we need to do, and actually that's pretty fundamental to what 561's trying to do. So if there's lots of optionality, maybe in API 17D there's too much optionality, maybe. So it's like, look, can we in the case of the observation here about subsea piping, let's just pick one. If they both work, it's like, no, we're not going to let Gordon from BP, not sort of dictate, but have a debate with the supplier about which one will we use. Pick one, because we've got 35 years of experience to say, either one works, hopefully. So let's just pick one and go down that route. And then the conversation stops. There's no engineering, so that saves time, and the suppliers know which one they're gonna buy. So it's a great example, Iman, that one about subsea piping, and like I said, I think it demonstrably, as an example, it says, yeah, this is where we need to change, and we need a culture change to say, it doesn't matter, pick one, because actually we've got experience that says, we've got loads of these trees subsea. Maybe some of them have API piping, some of them have ASME piping. Have they ever failed? Did they do the job? Yeah, right, okay. So do we need both? Maybe not. Well, we'll pick one and get it embedded into the specification and cut the optionality, and that helps a small point to drive the commoditization discussion. Hope that makes sense. But it's a good example, and there's loads of other examples I'll maybe touch on just on the forthcoming slides. Okay, IOGP. So yeah, we're talking about acronyms. So the IOGP, I don't want to dwell on this slide. It just tells you what IOGP is all about. So it's Oil and Gas Producers Association, and as part of that, there's this joint industry practice called JIP33, and you can see the context. I'm not going to read it out. I mean, it doesn't make good reading. Exploration and production projects. I mean, we as a community, I'll use the term community. We community-wise, we're not good at doing E&P projects, exploration production projects. You know, these numbers are not good. And, you know, through the World Economic Forum, this is quite a number of years ago now, it's, you know, we need to get better, we need to get more predictability. Predictability is a great word. And it's like, you know, we get into subsea trees as being part of the bigger picture. How do we get more predictability in deliveries? You know, so yeah, we want them faster, we want to maintain quality, but we want to get deliveries really predictable as part of a bigger picture predictability, and improve our project execution numbers a lot better than they've currently been. And you know, what we saw and the JIP kind of mission, you know, says that by standardizing the equipment as part of that procurement activities for these oil and gas projects, we can do so much more. You know, we can leverage standardization much more than we've currently done in the past. And you know, I think that's the challenge, and that's what IOGP is all about. I would also stress, and this was maybe a bit of news to me, that there's associate members. So there are now formally associate members, and the big, I keep on saying the big four suppliers who I mentioned earlier are all associate members of IOGP. So although it's primarily an oil and gas producers association, with all the usual suspects that we know and love across the globe, I think there's 77 operating companies in IOGP, or that kind of rough number. But there are associate members, including the FMC1 Subsea, Schlumberger 1 Subsea, Baker Hughes, Echo, and Acker. I think it was Acker to Burner, and I showed my age. And I'll simply leave that slide and say there is a lot more there. It's very public. You can go in, you can search on Google IOGP JIP33, and you can fill your books as far as learning all you want on what the JIP33 and the organisation and its objectives are all about on that website. But it's very transparent, and you know, they're doing lots of stuff. JIP33 is doing loads of stuff in the standardization space. So the procurement specifications, you know, Subsea Trees is just one area of equipment procurement. They're doing offshore cranes, low voltage switchgear, a whole host of stuff that they see value in, feeding into this context statement about doing things more efficiently and improving our economics on our oil and gas projects. Okay, so that's IOGP. Okay, so yeah, so this is a little bit more now into S561. So 561 is the name of the specification that the work group 9. So work group 9 was a number of about 10 or 12 operators. We got together through 2018 towards the end of 2018. We published after phase 3 of S561. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history of 561 and a little bit on the kind of forward plan. Although there's a bit of kind of uncertainty about the forward plan, but I can kind of share with you what I know. And again, if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to take them. So a bit on the history of the specification. So, you know, an imperative. So it's a procurement specification. So it's not an engineering specification, it's a procurement specification. That's really, really important. Of course, it's got a lot of technical content, but primarily in common with all the other specifications the IOGP JIP33 are working on, it's a procurement spec. So the actual document itself has got 4 sections. It's got a kind of technical body looking at the technical content of what a kind of subsea tree should consist of. It's got a quality section, it's got a documentation section, and then it's got a data sheet. And the key here was that the content of those 4 sections of 561 are very much seen as being supplemental to the parent document, in this case API 17D. So 17D is our specification for subsea trees, and the intention wasn't the IOGP want to be seen to create more specifications. The intention is that this is supplemental to 17D. It'll have a finite life because the aim was to get the content of the specification integrated into 17D through time. So it wasn't about, you know, we've got a criticism of 17D or any, you know, we want to do it differently, so to speak, and create more specifications. It was really to build on the specifications we've got. And in this case, it was 17D was defined as the parent document, and 561, the intention was to, or has been, to work with API with a view of getting the content in 561 embedded into 17D. And what it does is, what 561 tries to do is to reduce optionality. So back to that kind of commoditization statement, that question or observation at the start of the presentation. You know, we're looking to get an anticipated wide uptake from the operating companies, because fundamentally they're the people driving it in 5.6 and JIP33, but be under no illusions that it's got to be a collaboration. So when we were putting 561 together, when I say we, the group of 10 kind of resident experts from the various operating companies, when we put it together, we did very much collaborate, I'm going to say, with the key suppliers. Now, I stress, you know, at the time I was with BP didn't endorse everything that 561 says, because it was very much done collaboratively, and it was done on a consensus basis. So there's items of text in there that were agreed, but not necessarily agreed by all 10 or 12 of the parties putting together 561. So there is some stuff that, you know, when I was at BP, we were very supportive of. There was some text and requirements here that we were less supportive of. And that's also true of the suppliers. So, you know, we kind of best endeavors, you know, driving reduced optionality, you know, anticipating that we do try to maintain a drive towards lowest cost. You know, but you've got to be, you know, realistic about that. You know, is that something that, you know, 10 or 12 different operating companies are going to agree on, using a kind of decision making, a 80-20? So it was like, you know, do we agree with the wording? And it was a kind of hands up in the air in the room to decide, do we carry that wording or don't we? And it was basically done on a kind of notional 80-20 basis to develop the detailed content in 561 and its various sections. So that got published at the end of 2018, with a view that we would work with API to hopefully get it embedded into 17D, and that's been happening ever since. So that's a bit of the history. Yeah, maintenance section, I've probably covered quite a bit of that. You know, it's in the public domain. You know, we as an operating community were commending our colleagues to use it, and you know, again, Brent or others on the call might want to comment on that. I've actually said here, I was quite, yeah, at the time I did this, I didn't think it has, you know, maintenance, I didn't think it has been particularly well used, but I think it's improving. Post-publication feedback, so there's a vehicle in the IOGP website to feedback comments, but it's been very informal. I don't think the formal communication vehicle into IOGP has been used at all well. A lot of the post-publication feedback has been kind of instigated, I'm going to say, very much by myself and some of my colleagues, working with operators who put the original spec together, but also working with key individuals in the supply community. And Brent and Kevin are on the call from Schlumberger. You know, they were, you know, very, very key individuals in their organization, supporting us and working with us when we were critiquing the development of specification. And actually now that it's in public domain, you know, how well has it been used? And working with these guys and their opposite numbers in FMC and Baker Hughes and Acker to do similar with them. But there's certainly more to do. I've got some maybe a bit kind of controversial kind of comments here, I'll say, challenging comments. So, you know, the idea that we can take 561 and embed it into 17D, you know, that I see that as being a challenge. You know, that's like, can we, you know, is that the right outcome to embed it into 17D? I've made some comments here. 17D, the formal revision process of 17D is only on a 5-year cycle. is that too slow? We're currently in I think the third ballot, so it's been balloted for a revision 3 update, and there's something like 900 comments. I'm not quite sure where API are with addressing these comments, but my concern here is that 17D tends to grow legs. It gets bigger as a document, every version, and I'm kind of concerned that if we're trying to commoditize trees as a product and cut down optionality, are we truly aligned? When I say we are truly, are the objectives of what we're trying to achieve with 561, I've said truly fully aligned with 17D, and I think that's something going forward we really need to look at. What's the best way of making this work and actually deriving the business value that we really need? And people could look back and question, when we put 561 together, should we have had a bunch of engineers in the room doing it? Was that fundamentally, are engineers the best people placed to write a procurement specification? They're maybe the best people to write a technical specification, but are they the best people to write procurement specification? That's an interesting slant on things. A key question about how well is 561's objectives and the content in 561 aligned with supplier-led standardization efforts. So just to recognise, there's a huge amount of effort going on by all 4 suppliers, the 4 I've mentioned, and probably others, and smaller ones as well, in driving their own standardization efforts. And we've been lobbying the suppliers to try and align, in the case of standardization of the yellow equipment, the subsea equipment. Can you align to 561? Recognising that 561's just trees, and most of the supplier efforts are looking much more broadly at standardization of systems. And we, as operators, historically have bought systems. We don't buy trees, and yet 561's a tree-only specification. So there's some issues there where we can get conflicting requirements when we set our material requirements or cathodic protection requirements on a holistic basis for a system that maybe aren't fully aligned with what we've stuck into the unique requirements of S561 for trees. And that causes difficulties for the operators, and it causes difficulties for the suppliers when they're, say, tendering work or in fact designing and supplying equipment. So there's issues in the configuration of 561 in that it's a trees only document, and most people these days aren't buying trees, they're buying subsea systems. So that creates difficulty. Just then on the final comment on JIP33 phase 3, which is the phase that we've been in, that's or in at the moment, and moving into this year, 2021. There are significant efforts to expand the scope of new standards. So there's a great impetus, even with the current COVID restrictions and the downturn, to make this happen across a great portfolio of equipment in the oil and gas sector. And again, you can go onto JIP33's website and see that. And then finally, where are we kind of going with the future? So there has been some tentative discussion about updates on 561. I would say that's absolutely vital that we do that in collaboration with what's been done with API 17D. I've said the details have yet to be landed. Given that I kind of finished up with BP in October, I'm a little bit out of the loop, and I've been trying to get a bit more clarity on what does the future look like. But I think there's a great willingness by the operators and the suppliers to do more, because we fundamentally believe that it makes good business sense to drive towards the business efficiencies that we believe JIP33 is trying to aspire to. And we've already had 2 or 3 years now since the first version was published to learn that actually we've maybe got some things wrong in the content, and we could do things better. And there's some wording and language that maybe we would change on a subsequent revision. So we need to look at should we change 561 and publish a new version of that, or should we work with API and look at maybe some of the changes and publish them directly into some future edition of 17D? How do we take that forward? How do we kind of administer that going forward? And certainly, IOGP JIP33's budget for this year, I think, is significantly lower than it's been in the past, which is probably no big surprise. So there will be practical limits on what we can achieve and what the JIP33 guys can achieve going forward. But yeah, I'm certainly very kind of upbeat on our desire to carry on and try to progress this with you know, the strategic objectives that I set out right at the start. Okay, I'll stop there, and I'll check for any more questions or comments. And I'd love to hear from. We'll see. We've got a comment here. Let me just see, Mohammed, Mr. Higazi. Yeah, 516 covers horizontal and vertical trees. So that's a really good question, Higazi. So we decided at the time we published 561 that we would leave 4 tree types in. So we included dual bore, which is kind of very prevalent in the North Sea. It kind of has got a bit of a legacy aspect to it, and horizontal and vertical, both with and without tubing head spools. But you know, that's a great question, because that kind of challenge about, could we have gone further, and could we have said, actually, you know, let's assess horizontal and vertical and draw a line through one. But we decided we couldn't do that. We were never going to get agreement with the broader community to say, actually, we can commoditize just by, you know, choosing one. So it covers kind of the range of 5 and 15K. It covers, as I say, for the four tree types.
But Gordon, didn't the industry kind of organically eliminate one with the way that standardization went with suppliers as well? It wasn't horizontal, right? It ended up being dual bore more than the other 3.
Yeah, and I mentioned dual bore. You know, I think I could say honestly, I think Shell still do a bit of dual bore stuff, or they did in the North Sea, and we were still doing dual bore. BP were still doing dual bore stuff. I would really like to see us going away from that, and you know, getting the benefits of some of the new technologies with you know, monobore vertical systems. But yeah, and there's, you know, we could get right down a rat hole with that question. But you know, answering Mohammed's question, yes, 561 covers horizontal, 2 types of vertical, and currently dual bore. And that's a great example of how we, you know, on a future revision maintenance program on the document, we might go and try to cut that down. Yeah, sir, I see there are a few client requirements which will heavily impact the delivery of the tree. Same to new requirements for fasteners. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to say fundamentally, when we were writing 561, we were really trying hard to concentrate on aspects of the design that would give us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of delivery reduction. You know, I'll just make that statement. It might not look like that when you look at the content of 561, but the 12 of us in the room for the sessions that we had, both remotely and face-to-face in London, we really, you know, and yes, we were all engineers, but we really, you know, we were experienced. We felt we knew, in collaboration with supplier sessions, you know, where we could try to commoditize with a view to reducing delivery times, and hopefully reduce delivery time, certainly from an operator, means better NPV and ultimately lower cost. But I'll have no hesitation in supporting the comment about, you know, there's a new fastener specification, which number just escapes me, and we've got API 20 ENF, and I know as recently, just as the last few weeks, there's been a bit of an outcry about what was published, and I'll simply say, I think there's more we can do there. I don't think it was our finest hour. So there's been some criticism of where we've gone with fasteners, and maybe misalignment, if that's the right word, between what was published in JIP33 just a few months ago and the work that the API are doing on 20 ENF. I'll say no more than that, because it would be unfair of me, because I'm not directly involved. But certainly the the feedback I'm hearing through the industry is it's certainly not been well picked up or taken on board, and I think there's definitely work to be done to understand what we can learn from the publication of that fastener specification and how it's, you know, how it works into the API 20 ENF. And also, you know, what part does DNV play? Because again, I think I would say, you know, quite openly, you know, there's a view to say that, you know, DNV, you know, they're a private company, you know, how impartial are they? Maybe a controversial statement again to make, but yeah, we kind of need to look at that P204, because it's not, again, it's not just about, from a tree point of view, it's not just about speccing how many valves, what type of tree. There's huge value from a delivery point of view in, you know, commoditizing materials, commoditizing welding, commoditizing cladding. You know, these are big items. These are sort of foundational elements of what we would call in standardization. You know, and you know, if there's 2,000 parts in a subsea tree, you know, when we standardize, we should very much prioritize on these foundational elements, because if we can get these right, that's where we get biggest bang for our buck. So things like quality requirements, material selection, as I say, welding, and not just raw material, but welding and cladding as well. Waleed, how have you managed to overcome different wellhead interfaces? Again, yeah, Waleed, good question. You know, I think we tended to kind of specify a mandrel type as a preference, but we were very wary of, you know, prescribing like one wellhead interface, because we couldn't do that, because we would fall foul of probably patent infringements and competitive, you know, competitive practice or anti-competitive practice. So that's quite a sensitive area. So we were, as much as an engineer, I could say it would be great if we could more converge on that interface, because it causes a lot of grief, you know, not least of all with horizontal trees and, sorry, with vertical trees, and, you know, where does the tubing hanger go and all that kind of stuff. So I would simply say we haven't done too much with wellhead interfaces, just because of the sensitivity and how it might impact, you know, from a competitive kind of law or anti-competitive law point of view. Mohammed Tagazi, do you think in future major operators will go away asking suppliers to meet their global practices in favour of S561? Fundamentally, Mohammed, that was exactly what we really wanted to do. It was like, if we write the specification at 561, I'm saying we as a group of 10 operators, the expectation is that we stop then having a BP overlay or an E&I overlay or an Exxon overlay or a Shell overlay. So it's like, yeah, well, I'll do 561, there'll be no overlays. That's the aspiration. You know, we're not there yet. You know, some have moved quicker than others, some have been more specific than others with how much their overlay looks like, but the overlays are still there. But that is absolutely the intention is, you know, if we write in collaboration with suppliers, if we write a specification, guys, we've got to be using it. And I think looking at that and informing the way forward is hugely important, because if we were to say, quite honestly, right now, not all the operators are using the 561 spec and you know, alone. They've still got some degree of overlay, and that's not helped because we don't buy trees, we buy systems. So some of the overlays are very much system wide. So, you know, these things need to be addressed, and they need to help form what the future looks like. You know, if we still have, you know, operators and the suppliers know better than everybody. That's why we need to work really well, really collaboratively with the suppliers, because they need to kind of hold us to account. You know, who has the 30-page overlay? Who has the half-a-page overlay? You know, and why is that? And what can we do in future editions, if you will, of 561, or the strategy that we take, how we align with API? What's preventing us from saying, hey, we don't need any overlays? Because all those overlays end up costing us money. They fly right in the face of what what the suppliers are trying to do with their standardization agendas. Walid, can we then confidently, can we confidently will be one size fits all in terms of specs? It's moving. It's the aspiration to move in that direction, Walid. You know, but I think one size fits all is never going to work, because what you'll get is people reminding us that there's no such thing as a standard reservoir, and that's not being flippant. So, you know, could we do more with cutting the number of tree options? Probably. But my favorite one's chemical injection systems. So, you know, we didn't get too far down the road of formalizing like one type of chemical injection isolation means on the tree. So when you look at trees and you look at 561, we still allow a number of different iterations. So you can have 2 gate valves in series. You can have 1 gate valve and 1 check valve in series. You can probably have 2 check valves. You know, and I think I found that quite frustrating at the time, because it was, well, look, you know, that's a good example. Why can't we just harmonize and prescribe one set of isolation requirements? But we couldn't get agreement across the work group 9 members. And when we engaged with the suppliers, it was just like, well, we're just not going to be able to achieve that. So we left it fairly open. But again, that might be one area where we would go back into on a future maintenance cycle and say, you know, are we better placed now to say, you know, we can get away with, let's just agree that every chemical injection line on the tree is going to have 1 gate and 1 check. End of. We couldn't do that in 2000, or we were unable to do that in 2018. But you know, and of course, is that something that truly adds value? Because let's not get bogged down on the nitty gritty. Maybe we should say, don't worry about that, Gordon, because the suppliers say that only impacts the cost of the tree by, you know, plus or minus 1%, where there's far bigger opportunities under the guise of quality or welding or cladding, the big foundational aspects of standardization. Focus your efforts on that. Don't worry about chemical injection systems. Okay. In Norway, Statoil made one approach in standardization. Subsea valves are expensive, delivered late, and big in size. I'm not aware. So the question there is about what Statoil done around standardization. Subsea valves are expensive, delivered. Again, I think from a tree point of view, you know, we just want a valve that works reliably. On trees, I'm not sure that the suppliers would agree that they're expensive, deliver late, and big in size. I think you're maybe talking about, you know, subsea list valves, bigger ball valves, or maybe mounted on manifolds or plates. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I get the kind of story behind that observation there. Okay, we're going to quickly running out of time. I wanted to move on and just touch on. Yeah, so here, let me just touch on the last 2 slides very quickly, and these will be available, and we can uplift them onto the ESSE website or whatever after the presentation finishes. So, you know, this was some of this strategic objectives that I have experience on working on in my previous life, shall we say. And I know a lot of the examples and the touch points are very generic, and they're things that all the operators are working on, and suppliers. So I'll just say there's 5 topics. So I'll whip through these very quickly. So, you know, engineering. So, and it plays into some of the questions and comments that we've had. So yeah, so you know, when it comes to internal specifications, you know, we're really trying to do away with overlays. So I've said that. So, you know, we want the operators to use 561 and nothing else ideally. And you know, that plays into what the suppliers want as well, because if they're working to develop standard solutions to 561, then you know we need to cut down the overlays. I've touched about some of the conflicting impacts of, we don't buy trees, we buy systems. So you get some challenges around, you know, things like cathodic protection or subsea material requirements that aren't specified at a tree level generally. They're more specified at the system level, and that can cause conflict and ambiguity. You know, some examples are, and again touched on some of the comments. So you know, why can't we look at standardization on horizontal versus vertical connection systems? You know, the challenge of multi-bore versus mono-bore jumpers. Just a couple of examples where we maybe we should do more to work with the suppliers to say, look, can we harmonize our requirements? So there's lots of opportunities to do more in that space from a design point of view. And then moving on to sourcing. So pretty much touched on this, but it's all about doing things faster. So, you know, having less engineering to allow our engineers to go off and work on some other maybe more interesting stuff, such as processing and subsea compression and all the other technologies. But, you know, we've got to move towards this kind of a delivery reduction of something like 12 months, aspirational, maybe even less. You know, so that's got to be our focus as engineers or package managers, delivery managers, project managers. That's what we've got to do, because you know, for far too long the trees are seen as, oh my goodness, they're on their critical path yet again. You know, so why is it that after, you know, so many years of a subsea industry that's still the case? So yeah, increased use of supplier led. So we talked about that. Catalog configurable, and there's lots of terminology there to be used. But hopefully 516, the use of 516 plays into that, because I'm confident that the suppliers are adopting 561 as part of their drive to offer standardized equipment assemblies and sub-assemblies. And also, you know, stocking programs at whatever level, you know, whether it's long lead raw material, whether the suppliers are able to stock subcomponents. But we've got to collaborate as operators and suppliers. We've got to work with each other to make that happen, and you know, more so than ever in the current climate with you know, the oil price so low. You know, and another thing that you know, in the company I worked with previously, you know, we were looking at, you know, much more rental of running tools, much more, you know, rental equipment, so minimal, you know, OPCO-owned workover and riser systems or landing strings. You know, that was just a strategic decision that you know, I think more and more, I'm sure the suppliers would be able to comment on that. And also, of course, even getting down to install and supply contracts, where, you know, some of the big suppliers are now not just selling the equipment, but selling and installing. So you get the whole dynamic of, you know, trees aren't ex works anymore. Trees are, we take delivery as an operator, we take delivery of the tree on the seabed. You know, what does that do to standardization? How does that play into standardization from a contractual point of view? And very quickly, final slide, technology, people and delivery predictability. So, you know, it's really important that, you know, standardization isn't seen as creating a dinosaur. You know, there is always going to be technology, and as engineers, you know, striving for technological advances. So I've just said, you know, there was a few there that with my previous operation company experience, you know, we were looking at very hard, you know, things like all electric. You know, yes, we've got valve actuators, chokes, diagonal safety valves, it's all electric, but what more can we do? Fiber optic, you know, we saw tremendous value in embracing fiber optic technology, but 516 at the moment doesn't cover fiber optic and the downhole requirements for fiber optic. So is that something we need to work on? You know, and touching on the kind of people, you know, standardization plays into, you know, less engineering and you know, not compromising, but reducing our team size. So, you know, if the equipment is more commoditized, we need smaller teams of people to execute the work, you know, both the operator and the supplier. So realistically, it's, you know, we need to be looking at, you know, all our costs, and that includes people costs and team costs and office costs more than ever in the current climate. So, you know, the standardization discussion plays right into that. Not just, you know, how much does a tree cost, but all the indirect costs associated with, you know, the past huge project teams that we've seen needed because we keep on re-engineering things. So fundamentally, that's got to change. And ultimately, again, just having touched on that earlier, the whole aspect of delivery predictability. So not only do we want things faster and therefore hopefully a better sort of price, whether that's capital cost or whether that's the cost of installation and subsequent operation, but doing things business predictable is hugely important. Being able to predict deliveries regardless of what the cost is. You know, having business done in a predictable manner is hugely important. And, you know, the very first slide, the IOGP slide, you talked about cost overruns. You know, so you know, yes, we want lower costs to keep ourselves competitive, but we need to be doing things predictably, and having standardized products undoubtedly plays a huge part in predictability of, you know, operational integrity, of reliability, you know, not just you know, cost, safety. So standardization gives us a whole plethora of opportunities in terms of more project predictability, and that's hugely important. Okay, we're just after, is that 9 o'clock? Just after 9 o'clock, Houston. Sorry, 9 o'clock Cairo time. I'll stop there.
Yeah, just spot on, Gordon.
But there was one question there. So, hi, Gordon. All electric is still not fully. I don't. So all electric. What I'll say about all electric is it's coming on. It's coming on. Certainly, in my previous life, we were looking pretty heavily at all electric. It's well known and well documented that Cameron, back some years ago, put an all electric system in for Total offshore Holland. And as recently as I think last year, they actually upgraded one of the wells or added a new well with an all electric downhole safety valve. So that's coming along. It's, you know, so depends on how you define all electric, but certainly we, when I was at my previous company, you know, we were looking at, you know, all electric subsea systems and how we could take that forward. So it's certainly on the agenda, but all electric or electric was not included on 561. But, you know, again, it's something for the future. Did your standardization one controls vendor? No, I think the expectation is that when you buy your tree from the same supplier as does the control. So we're more and more we're tending to buy systems. You know, I've got first-hand experience of buying trees from one supplier and controls from another, and you know, it's not worked out badly, but I don't think it's where we want to be going as an industry. Ahmed, any more questions or any more comments, or we'll just wrap it up there? Over to you.
I think we have a couple of more comments, Gordon, on the chat from Yasser and Ayman.
Okay, and I'm quite happy if I guess Mr. Hagazi, hopefully he's still
awake. Yeah, we will close after these two comments. So
okay,
we're exceeding the 1 hour.
But well, yeah, sir. Yeah, thanks very much. And if anybody wants to follow up on anything I've said or take exception to afterwards, feel free to, I guess, do that through the ESE website. Do you think in the future we can standardize horizontal and vertical connection systems between tree and other subsea modules? Can we standardize? Well, I mean, I think you've got to say we could. But again, it's back to, is there value in doing that? You know, so I think it's a question we need to collaborate with. It would be awful easy to say, yeah, why don't we? You know, but you know, you look at deep water, you look at shallow water, you look at the complexity of the tooling. You know, you can argue that there's good reasons for why we've got the systems that we've got, the monobore, multi-bore, horizontal, vertical. But there's no doubt we could optimize some of that. And I think we should strive to optimize. I wouldn't necessarily say, you know, we'll go as far as having a one size fits all. That's the way I would answer that. But I think it's a good example of where we would want to work with the suppliers and say, well, what do they think? You know, what would they like to see in their, or what are they having in their portfolio for standardization? So, you know, in the case of Brent's on the call, you know, what do OneSubsea, you know, what do they see the industry? What's the industry telling them they want? Because I'm quite sure, you know, they would like to commoditize some of the connection systems as much as possible, but they're only going to do that, you know, driven by what the market tells them. And at the moment, it's probably one area where we haven't done too much. And again, part of the discussion maybe needs to be: is it a big deal breaker for the suppliers? You know, is it foundational? Is it going to significantly advance, you know, a lower cost or a faster tree? It's you know, so it's not just doing it for the sake of doing it because we know there's a proliferation of different types. There's doing it because it gets us further down the journey at the end game of lower cost through you know, maybe optimized functionality or delivery enhancements, quicker deliveries. Thanks for that question, Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for an enjoyable event, and the time passed very quickly. I was worried that you would spend a lot of time speaking to yourself, but with the interaction of our attendees, this didn't happen. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please stay tuned for our LinkedIn page for more to come. Hopefully we can have Gordon one more time with a new topic.
Thanks very much for all the questions.
We can see everybody enjoyed.
Thanks, Gordon.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. All the best, and thanks for everybody's participation. Hopefully you got something out of that.
Yeah, very, very good. Great lecture, great webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Okay,
Ahmed.
thank you, everyone. We will stop the recording. We will post this recording on our YouTube channel and post it on our LinkedIn page as usual. So see you again, hopefully in the next session in maybe this month, hopefully. Thank you, everyone.